The Congressional Human Rights Caucus is very pleased to open this hearing on human rights issues in Yugoslavia. I think it's important for all of us to begin by underscoring the purpose of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, which is a bipartisan activity of the Congress, and which has one single objective, and that is to diminish and hopefully eventually to eliminate human rights abuses wherever they occur. Over the last number of years, we have been concerned with human rights conditions on every continent. We have examined human rights violations in countries that have non-democratic regimes and countries that have democratic regimes. And it is our conviction that human rights are indivisible, that the violation of human rights of any group or any individual, for whatever reasons, ethnic, religious, linguistic, cultural, are human rights violations that ought to concern all of us. The most distinguished chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, has arrived, and I would like to call on him first to make whatever observations he would care to do so. Senator Pell.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy and hospitality, permitting me to speak and run, but like you, we all have many commitments. I think that Yugoslavia is experiencing a very difficult time, and there's a real prospect, as we all know in this room particularly, that one or more of the republics may end up seceding. In this situation, you would think that the last thing the defenders of the unity of Yugoslavia would want to do is to stir up ethnic tension in Serbia, which was the core around which, as I understand it, Yugoslavia was built. Yet that's exactly what's happened. The Serbian government, acting with substantial support from the national government, is brutally repressing human and political rights in the autonomous province of Kosovo, which is 90% of the population of which is Albanian. And I can remember myself being there on the shores of Lake Arkrid, near the area of Kosovo, and seeing and realizing that the people around me were Albanian, not Serbs, not Montenegrins, not any other Yugoslav. In February of '89, a repressive state of emergency was imposed throughout Kosovo, and in the following month, the province's autonomous status was revoked. And now, mass arrests have taken place, killings and beatings have occurred, other harsh, restrictive measures have been imposed on the Albanian majority in Kosovo. And as a result of those actions, the Yugoslavia has been in violation of its political obligations, I emphasize the word obligations, under the Helsinki Final Act and under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We in our country must raise our voices and demand an end to repression in Kosovo. To my mind, it's very ironic that as the winds of freedom are blowing away repression elsewhere in Eastern Europe, they're being stifled in what was once thought to be a fairly progressive country. It can't be in Yugoslavia's or Serbia's interest to deny in Kosovo what's being exercised all over Eastern Europe. Human, cultural, political rights must be restored, should be restored, and I believe with the support around the world and the enthusiasm here will be restored before we're through. I understand, too, that last week the state of emergency was lifted in Kosovo and 100 political prisoners were released. It's about time they were, too. And that's good news, but it's not yet clear whether anything more than a cosmetic gesture has occurred. We all know that when the Chinese lifted martial law in Beijing, not much really changed. But it does appear that Yugoslavia is beginning to show sensitivity to world opinion. What the United States should do now is to keep the pressure on Yugoslavia to take effective action in support of human rights and reconciliation in Kosovo. And this is what today's hearing can help bring about. It's what the attendance of all of you in this room, the room is chock-a-block with people, and the people outside in the halls and in the street are doing, and I congratulate you on it. I'd like to see this occur wherever Albanians are throughout the United States. I congratulate and thank every one of you for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for permitting me this opportunity.
I want to commend Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, the co-chairman of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, for organizing this hearing on the human rights situation in Yugoslavia. The situation is serious. What happens in Yugoslavia can have important repercussions far beyond Yugoslavia. My interest in this issue dates back to July 1986, when, as chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on European Affairs, I visited Yugoslavia and several Eastern European countries. It was apparent even then, 5 years after the end of the Tito era, that Yugoslavia was headed for a period of political change with the strong possibility of instability. Although instability often accompanies major change, it is a small price to pay for political democracy and economic freedom. If the intentions of those who lead a nation during the transition to greater individual liberty are honorable, in retrospect, any instability resulting from change will seem trivial compared to the benefits of the new democratic order. Unfortunately, not all leaders are honorable. In Yugoslavia, for example, some officials seem determined to lead by appealing to dark nationalistic passions rather than to the principles of political equality and economic justice for all. Short-sighted nationalist rhetoric that denies fair and equal treatment to all nationalities inevitably results in violence and disorder. This is what has happened in Yugoslavia. Irresponsible leaders have provoked attacks on Yugoslavian citizens of Albanian ethnic origins. Those same leaders also have usurped the very limited local political autonomy of Kosovo province. In the process, Yugoslavia has become the odd man out in Europe. As Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Germans, Hungarians, and others work to resolve their problems and their differences, the Kosovo province situation worsens. Helsinki Watch has labeled the Kosovo problem, quote, a frightening example, unquote, of one-party dictatorships. In February of this year, Enver Hadri, the leading human rights activist for Kosovo Albanians, was assassinated in Brussels. His death was but the latest in a wave of assassinations of Yugoslavian human rights activists abroad that has claimed 125 lives in the past 10 years. That figure does not include the hundreds of Kosovo Albanians who have been slaughtered in Yugoslavia in the past few years, some by inhumane and internationally outlawed dum-dum bullets. In addition, the European Parliament has passed a motion condemning the killings of ethnic Albanians by the Yugoslav army. According to the Helsinki Federation for Human Rights and Helsinki Watch, Yugoslavia is conducting a massive purge of ethnic Albanians. The solution to these problems, it seems to me, is free elections, respect for the human rights of all ethnic minorities, and a legal system that guarantees equal treatment for all. Additionally, Kosovo should have republic status with the same rights as the other Yugoslavian republics. Continuation of the widespread repressive policies will guarantee only widespread suffering and a further depreciation of world public opinion of Yugoslavia. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this opportunity to speak out once again on behalf of the Albanians of Kosovo. We have assembled here today an impressive, balanced array of witnesses, and I look forward to hearing their remarks. We are especially honored to have here today a delegation of 12 spokesmen from Kosovo. We welcome you. As respect leaders of your communities in Kosovo, you are the best source of current information on the communist dictatorship that denies your aspiration for freedom. Thank you for traveling so long to tell us the story. Let me also add on a personal note that I have visited Yugoslavia and I believe I visited nearly every country in Europe at one point or another, either as a student or as a soldier or as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And over the years, it has impressed me that we should side on the side of human rights. That is where we get the greatest long-term gains in terms of our foreign policy. We should do it because it is right, and in the long run, it works out the best. But I fear that our State Department and others have worked out or are embracing a system of trying to be friendly with the Yugoslav government, not wanting to ruffle any feathers, and we are overlooking a very serious human rights problem, and that will come back to haunt us. I think if our country is careful to be on the side of human rights, we're better off in the long run, and we should be very careful to analyze those human rights, to report on them, and where they are being violated, to bring it to the surface. And you've done an excellent job of that.
It now gives me great pleasure to call on the ranking Republican member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and indefatigable fighter for human rights, distinguished colleague and good friend, Congressman Broomfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, at the outset, congratulate you and Congressman Porter for having these important hearings. I'd like to begin my statement by commending you for the promoting greater respect for human rights in Yugoslavia and around the world. Today, the bells of freedom ring in Eastern Europe. Those in Yugoslavia are still silent. If they ring once again, it will be because of heroes like Mr. Periga, and he's here with us today. And for years, many of us in Congress considered Yugoslavia to be Western-oriented and concerned about human rights. In 1986, I was quickly disabused of the notion when Mr. Peter Ivasai, a Michigan resident, an American citizen, was arrested while visiting his family in Yugoslavia. His crime? Well, he was charged for demonstrating in front of the Yugoslavia embassy here in Washington back in 1981. More recently, I learned about Mr. Periga. He is a young Croatian human rights advocate who had been jailed and tortured by Yugoslav authorities for exercising the rights that all of us take for granted. Well, what was his crime? Collecting signatures to demand the release of all political prisoners in the country. In the files of the Yugoslavia police, Mr. Periga is considered a criminal. In the rest of the world, he is considered a hero. He is recognized as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International and other responsible human rights organizations. Mr. Periga is merely one soldier, a very brave and effective soldier, in an army of Yugoslavians of all ethnic background who are asking for the freedom that millions of other Eastern Europeans demanded in 1989, the year of the people. The American people are being asked to help support the countries of Eastern Europe. I believe Americans will be generous unless they feel their support is being used to prop up tyrannical regimes. Political prisoners still languish in Yugoslavia jails. Young ethnic Albanians are gunned down in the province of Kosovo. And some ethnic Albanians are gunned down in the province, as I said, in Kosovo. And some ethnic Albanians who were invited to this hearing, yes, they have been denied the right to leave Yugoslavia. Clearly, Yugoslavia officials don't want Congress and the American people to know the human rights tragedy of that country. It's time for the United States to demand justice in Yugoslavia. No more business as usual in Belgrade. No more business. We want Yugoslavia officials to know that as long as they abuse their own people, they shouldn't expect any support from America. America has the leverage, and we should use it. Yugoslavia should know that it can never achieve economic growth without a growth in their respect for freedom and justice. Let me say also that I am cautiously optimistic about recent events in Yugoslavia. Many political prisoners have reportedly been freed, and the special measures in Kosovo have been ended. We all hope this new attitude on the part of the Yugoslav officials continue. I again want to congratulate Congressman Lantos, Congressman Porter of Illinois, and all of you that are here today. I know of no other issue that is more important to the human rights cause than the problems that we have in Yugoslavia. And I thank the gentleman very much for this opportunity to speak.
I would like to call next on a most distinguished member of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, a member of its executive committee, and an indefatigable fighter for human rights for many years, Congressman Ben Gilman of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly want to welcome all of the witnesses, and I regret I was delayed in getting over here because of the business on the floor in the House. But I particularly welcome this opportunity to address the problems in Yugoslavia, and particularly in the Kosovo province. I'd like to read a quote. Gradually, the age-old longing of the humankind for peace will be reflected in better governmental structures that will be forced to comply with the demands of a great and enlightened citizenry throughout the world. Mr. Chairman, those words were uttered by President Dwight Eisenhower on November 8, 1954, and they've never been more poignant than they are today. The raging tide of democratization in Eastern Europe makes more salient the issue of human rights and political autonomy for ethnic Albanians in the Kosovo province of Yugoslavia. In the recent past, military presence and violence and harassment in the province of Kosovo has provided an ominous reminder of the repression that comes from ethnocentric attitudes that have no place today in modern society. Last fall, a delegation of European parliamentarians visited the Kosovo province to investigate firsthand the human rights situation in that region, and they returned from their visit heartened by some progress in opening up that society, but dismayed by the lack of cooperation by the Yugoslav government officials in not permitting them to visit with dissident groups. They were afforded only second-hand level meetings with government officials. Recent events in Kosovo have created an ambience of optimism that has been wanting for years. On April 18, 1990, the President of Yugoslavia lifted the state of emergency in Kosovo, hopefully signifying a return to normal life for both Albanians and Serbs. It's our sincere hope that the decision to lift the state of emergency was made because the parties involved recognize that peaceful negotiation is the only effective means to solve the ethnic problems of Kosovo in a democratic manner. Hopefully, this will soon be followed by the release of all political prisoners and respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms in Kosovo. Permit me, Mr. Chairman, to thank our good friend, former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, for his outstanding work on this issue. I'd also like to thank our good co-chairman of the Human Rights Caucus, gentleman from California, Mr. Lantos, and co-chairman Porter, for their work not only on this issue, but for constantly and consistently advocating human rights for all peoples in all nations of the world. I'm here to listen, not to speak, and I look forward to hearing the remainder of our witnesses. I want to welcome the leaders from the Kosovo province who are here with us today through the arrangements of Congressman DioGuardi, and we want to welcome them to this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Congressman Gilman. It gives me great pleasure to call on a distinguished former colleague, most effective former member of the Executive Committee of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, who has fought for human rights on many continents and in many different situations, and who has taken such a prominent leadership role on this issue, the Honorable Joe DioGuardi.
Mr. Chairman, I see our good colleague, Congressman Hank Brown there, and I'm wondering whether or not he has other business, and I would be happy to defer to him if he has a statement.
I'll be most happy to call on my friend and colleague from Colorado if he would like to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suspect I will learn a great deal coming after our former colleague, so I will defer.
Thank you very much. It's all yours, Congressman DioGuardi.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, for all you are doing for oppressed people all over the world. Some of my proudest days in the House of Representatives was as an executive committee member of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, serving with you on so many issues, including Tibet and Soviet Jewry, and certainly the issue today in Kosovo. But I'm also very happy today to be still a part of you as a member of the board of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation. And I applaud all that you're doing there as well, and Congressman Gilman and Congressman Hank Brown, and thank you for your support. I have to thank the real freedom fighters today, my dear co-chairman, the people who died. Now, there are hundreds of people who have died, but it's not easy to get information in Yugoslavia, not easy at all. But let's start with the 27 documented cases in 1989 in those demonstrations, and the 34 documented cases early this year in January and February. And let's talk about the Gervala brothers that were killed and shot down in cold blood, along with another civil rights activist, Enver Hadre, and the papers in Brussels. I went there to eulogize him. The family allowed me to go to his funeral. The papers all pointed to the Serbian secret police, believe it or not. State terrorism is alive and well, maybe not in Moscow, but in Belgrade. And we've got to do something about it, and we've got to send a very, very strong signal. I was forced to go and testify. I wasn't forced to testify, but I was forced to wear a bulletproof vest when I went to Geneva, and again when I did rallies in front of the United Nations in New York. In Geneva, I went there because Mr. Hadri was shot down because he was ready to deliver to the special rapporteur the 34 names documented. I took those names literally off his body. His wife gave them to me, and I continued that journey under threats, and I had to wear a bulletproof vest. And you've heard the stories from Congressman Broomfield about Peter Iveze. Can you imagine 5 years after a demonstration in New York in 1981 or in Detroit, he goes back and they had his picture, Udba, and they arrested him and they put him in jail, and it literally took a hearing that I remember you were at, Congressman Gilman and Congressman Broomfield and myself, to get him released. And we have all this good news today. Why all of a sudden are the Serbs so generous? They're letting go Azem Vlasi and the other political prisoners, and they say all of them. I doubt that very much. And they're all of a sudden lifting a state of emergency. We know that is nonsense. We know that they're trying to paper over one of the most oppressive regimes the world has ever seen. Apartheid is alive and well. It now exists in Yugoslavia, in the Kosovo province. It is now gone from South Africa, or at least it's going. And Yugoslavia has a Nelson Mandela, or at least the Albanians have, Adam Damace, who was in jail for over 27 years. And Nelson Mandela was released before even any talk of releasing Adam Damace occurred. So I have to thank those freedom fighters that died, and I have to thank the 15 that flew here just in the last 2 days from Kosovo, and believe it or not, threats have already been received. There are security agents and FBI agents back there. Some have to travel in bulletproof limousines already. It's the truth. Now, if this is America, and if we're going to stand up for a system that is supposed to be equal and fair, certainly our government has to take a strong position. And I hope we're not going to be swayed by all of a sudden this generosity that comes on the day of our hearing, when you know they try to cancel this hearing, postpone it, and do so many other things. Let me also thank those hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 Albanians that listened to me as I made and spoke in your name, Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, because you know how hot it was out there. They listened to me, and as like the Pied Piper, they followed me outside, and I said, don't disrupt this hearing. Let it go. It's important for Kosovo. Wait the 2 and 3 hours. Be like Gandhi, like the people in Kosovo. The terrorists are not the Albanians. It's the Serbian authorities. The only ones that are being killed today are Albanians. The only lists of deaths that I see are Albanians, not Serbs. How can they be terrorists? The communists, and by the way, this is the issue. The issue is not religion. If it were religion, what are 1,500,000 Christian Slovenes doing supporting the Kosovars if this were a religious issue? The issue is not terrorism, not certainly Albanian terrorism, because Albanians don't fire back. They've learned to be like Gandhi, to be like Martin Luther King, and literally they demonstrated that today by leaving those halls outside so this meeting could continue, and they traveled from California, Dallas, and all over. And I want to thank those people as well. And I have to thank my good friend, Dr. Eva Brantley, who is right here with her great friend, Waldo, who you gave the water to. She came with me to Geneva. She's not only a lawyer and a master's in law, she has her PhD. She's a doctor of law, one of the world's greatest human rights international lawyers who worked with the Solidarity movement in Poland. She is an ethnic Polish person, educated or raised in England and educated here at Harvard. And she understands the plight of the Albanians, and she has volunteered in her status as an NGO, non-government organization, to represent us at the UN. And I want to thank her for being here because she is the quintessential volunteer in America. The issue, my dear friends, is not ethnic, it's not religion, it's not separation, it's not terrorism, it's simple. It's democracy versus communism. We have Dr. Rogova, who you're going to see very shortly. He has now almost 700,000 members of his Democratic Alliance Party in less than a year. More than 100,000 of them have thrown their party cards, Communist Party cards, into the bonfires. That's the issue. And remember what J. Edgar Hoover said in that book that I remember reading in college. He entitled Masters of Deceit. There are no more professionals, better professionals of lies than communists. And today in Serbia, you have a one-man, one-party dictatorship that is trying to impose his will against all kinds of international conventions and law upon the people there. And many, many people are dying. Mr. Chairman, tyranny like hell, Thomas Paine said. Let's go back to the beginnings of this great country in the American Crisis Papers. He said, tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. In those days, they had the tyrant of the king, the monarchy. Today, the tyranny which must be overcome in the Kosovo crisis is what the U.S. Helsinki Watch report of that name describes as the, quote, the frightening example of one-party dictatorship, the full weight of a police state controlled by one ethnic minority unleashed against another ethnic minority. And so hell, as Thomas Paine said, which must be triumphed over in Kosovo, in its crisis, is the hell of a Serbian apartheid. I do not use that term lightly, but on the international criminal law definition that Dr. Brantley gave me. And let me give it to you. The term crime of apartheid is defined, and it shall apply to inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination of one racial group of persons over any other group of persons, or systematically oppressing them. That is what has gone on in South Africa. That is what's going on right now in Kosovo, even as we speak, because the state of emergency has not been lifted. That's what they said. Let's see what they're really doing. And they don't let too many people in to see what they're doing. I went there twice. I could not meet with the press. I was forced out of the hotel in Pristina, forced to do a press conference on the street, and they threatened to arrest me for a public display because that was against their law. You cannot talk on their streets. It's incredible that a system like this exists in the world today when there are 2 million, by their count, Albanians in that province, over 90%, and they want to emasculate them in every way. This definition of apartheid from Article 2 of the Convention of the Elimination of the Crime of Apartheid precisely captures the human rights situation in Kosovo. Beginning in 1988, the government of the Republic of Serbia has systematically and brutally repressed the Albanian people of Kosovo in order to impose Serbian hegemony over that province. This purpose has, however, been skillfully disguised by a carefully crafted Serbian disinformation crusade. You can't believe the propaganda machine that I face when I go to Belgrade and I try to give my press conferences there. The Serbian government formally launched an Albanian Kosovo subjugation campaign in late 1988 when it moved for the amendment of the Kosovo, Serbian, and Yugoslav constitutions. These amendments aim to abrogate Kosovo's status as an autonomous Yugoslav province and to subordinate its predominantly Albanian population, over 90%, to the Serbian rule. Nonviolent Albanian opposition to the amendments was met with police force, mass arrests, and imprisonment, and widespread dismissals from work. Indeed, according to the Yugoslav government statistics and published in 1989, of the 360 or 36 persons officially acknowledged to have been sentenced for political offenses in Yugoslavia during 1988, 336 were ethnic Albanians from Kosovo. Of the 517 political charges filed nationwide, 43% of the defendants were ethnic Albanians from Kosovo. Most of them were imprisoned and indicted for, quote, counter-revolution, hostile propaganda, or incitement of the ethnic unrest, close quote. That is, for taking part in a constitutional caucus, in protests, in meetings, or strikes, or for suspected participation in such assemblies or protests. Also, attendance, support, or suspicion of either resulted in arbitrary dismissal from work, and you'll hear that from some of the other witnesses that came all the way from Kosovo just yesterday. Oppression intensified throughout 1989 as the constitutional amendments near ratification secured passage in Kosovo, Serbian and Yugoslav assemblies, and finally entered into force. First, on February 27, 1989, the Serbian government imposed a state of emergency in Kosovo, banning all Albanian assemblies, strikes, protests, and political associations, imposing a police curfew throughout the province, and deploying thousands of troops and police in an open show of force. When I went there, you can't imagine what I saw. I went there twice, the first time in November. The hundreds of police deployed on every corner, 5 or 6, with automatic weapons. You can't imagine the kind of firepower that was used, or at least threatened to be used, and then used on the streets of Pristina and all over Kosovo. Second, 1 week before the definitive ratification vote, on March 28, 1989, Serbian authorities isolated, that is, detained on suspicion of certain putative criminal activity, Kosovo's ethnic Albanian leaders as a government countermeasure to any final anti-enactment demonstrations. And third, on March 27th to 28th, 1989, post-ratification demonstrations were dispersed by security police using, among others, automatic assault weapons armed with high-caliber live ammunition. And let me just stop here for a minute, because I have to summarize much of this, and I will insert it on the record. Do you know what really pains me today, Congressman Lantos, Congressman Gilman, and all the other esteemed members and former colleagues? The empty chair that's right here should have had Dr. Zekaria Tsana. On my second trip to Kosovo, no one made a better case than Dr. Tsana, who was the head of the Committee for Human Rights and the Defense of Human Rights in Kosovo. He was not able to come. Guess why? They took away his passport. They indicted him. They did not want him to be here. They know how effective he is. He showed me in his apartment the rubber bullets, some 3 inches high, 1 inch wide, that are used at close range to break bones. And if you go to a hospital because you have a broken bone or hit by a rubber bullet, that's automatic grounds for being arrested. So there are hundreds of young Albanian youth with broken bones in the homes that cannot do anything about it. This is the kind of terrorism that exists today. He showed me the dum-dum bullets. He showed me the automatic weapons and the bullets that are being used. It's incredible that that disproportionate kind of force can be used today against an unarmed population, but that is what is going on today in Kosovo, and that's what you have to hear about. Let me give you just some examples of what happened in those first days of April or in the demonstrations. 1, in Zur, dozens of elementary school children were shot dead or injured when security forces indiscriminately shot at the demonstrating children from a helicopter. This is fact. 2, in Malasheva, Dim and Arsim Takarazizi, aged 7 and 8, were killed by security forces, although the police reportedly explained that the brother of one of the 2 children had been playing with a gun belonging to a soldier and had shot the children by mistake. 3, in Gilan, Basri Ibrahimi, aged 24, was shot dead while he was in his car near a demonstration. It was alleged that the family members had been tortured and forced by the police to accept that he had committed suicide. And you can't imagine how many stories like that I hear. Official sources report 237 Albanians were isolated at the time of the final ratification vote, 41 of whom were eventually charged with criminal offenses and 18 with misdemeanors. The non-governmental Yugoslav-based Committee for the Defense of Human Rights in Kosovo gives the total of Albanian isolatees as 500. The official figure of 237 only takes account of the leading Albanian political activists who were isolated immediately before the ratification vote on suspicion of possible future membership in illegal associations, strike organizing, or contact with, quote, hostile immigrant groups. By the way, that includes me. When I went to Kosovo, they wouldn't take my business card, they wouldn't take a newsletter, because they said, Congressman DioGuardi, do you see all those police following you? And they followed me right off the plane, and they told me in Kosovo, you ought to turn back. It's dangerous for you, Mr. DioGuardi. I says, I'm not turning back. And I went, and they followed me, and they intimidated everybody that talked to me. But it is true, that kind of intimidation, if they had accepted merely a newsletter, later on, if they're found with it, they could be arrested on the spot for hostile propaganda under Article 133. This is what exists today. You talk about the breakdown of the rule of law. This is the problem we have today in Yugoslavia, especially Serbia. Many of the political and apolitical isolatees were held for up to 3 months in Serbian prison facilities, where they were often tortured and subjected to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment. The 1989 report of the Special Rapporteur on Torture to the United Nations Human Rights Commission gives the following example. This is not me, the Special Rapporteur. Following an appeal sent on 21 February 1989 to the authorities, 215 intellectuals were arrested and sent to the prison of Leskovic in Serbia. On the road to that prison, and in the prison itself, they were brutally beaten and subjected to various forms of torture, including planting of needles under their nails, squeezing the genitals, beating on the soles of their feet, and burning feet with burning paper. This is the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations speaking. Independent, I would think. Albanian intellectuals, engineers, and senior accountants, whom I interviewed on my trips to Yugoslavia, 2 of them, those fact-finding missions, they repeated similar isolation experiences to me. In addition, Yugoslav civil rights lawyers in Belgrade, to whom I spoke, informed me that techniques similar to those described by the United Nations Special Rapporteur are routinely employed in political trials in order to intimidate witnesses for the defense. And we all know about Azim Vlasi. I won't go into the information on that, how he was arrested, all of the phony trumped-up charges, and all of a sudden today, because you insisted on having this hearing, and you know how they intimidated you, Congressman Lantos, up until Friday, the Yugoslav government gave you every reason, concocted reason to call it off. Today, finally, they had to let him go because they knew they could not intimidate you, thank God. Now, why didn't they let Dr. Zakaria Tsana here? I don't know, but I would hope that you continue in your crusade, because I know the letter that you wrote last week with Congressman Broomfield and Congressman Porter, and also Senator Dole and Senator Pressler, that letter so that Zakaria Tsana gets back his passport, because there's no graver violation except the right to life itself when it's taken than taking someone's passport away when they want to give testimony on human rights abuses. And that's what they did to Dr. Zakaria Tsana. According to the United Nations Department of State report on human rights practices in 1989, at least 1,500 Albanians have been expelled from the Kosovo League of Communists for allegedly espousing nationalist and so-called separatist views. Everyone here, Congressman, has renounced separation. Even the Helsinki Watch when it went there. I heard about the discussions with Steny Hoyer. I heard how Dr. Rogova and the others said, we renounce violence, we renounce separation, we want to begin dialogue. And you know something? In that meeting, Mr. Marina, the puppet of the Serbian government, couldn't find one person he wanted to talk to in that room of these moderate leaders from Kosovo. They don't want to start a dialogue. It's not into Mr. Milosevic's interest. His only political platform has been built on the nationalism and stirring up these ancient hostilities. That's his political platform. he's afraid to drop it because he knows he's losing day to day to Mr. Markovic. But he's holding as hostage right now 2 million Albanians in Kosovo, and that is the issue. Albanian workers have been massively purged from large and small enterprises. A mining engineer with whom I spoke to in Geneva told me in November of 1989, 787 Albanian miners were fired from the Stade Tar colliery, a colliery which employs some 3,000 workers. He said the reason the management gave the miners for their dismissals was that their names were on a, quote, list in the Kosovo Office of Internal Affairs. There's a segregation policy. There is an apartheid. And this policy extends to housing and education. For example, 2,000 houses for Serbs only have just been completed in the town of Obilic. And the elementary school in Preljuva commune of Zrketurme will enroll only Serbian and no Albanian children. Moreover, since January of this year, Serbian and Albanian school children have been completely segregated from one another. Serbian children attend school in the morning, Albanian in the afternoon. This is how far it has gotten. This is what we have to send in independent bodies to investigate, and we need more of those independent bodies. This expansion of Serbian segregation has been accompanied by an escalation in the killing, torture, arbitrary arrest, and purging of Albanians in Kosovo during the first quarter of this year. For example, I'm almost complete. On January 27, 1990, the local police from the commune of Orachovic opened fire with automatic assault weapons on a peaceful pro-democracy march in the village of Brestovac. They did not warn the freedom-chanting marchers to disperse, but fired full M70 machine gun ammunition belts into the crowd, killing 4 people. Only after the fatal shots were fired did the police order the marchers to disperse, and they then used tear gas to break up the crowd. 3 days later, on January the 30th, that's this year, police assailed the village of Stanovic with machine gun fire, even though there was no demonstrations in progress at the time. They barraged the streets for an hour, killing 2 and seriously wounding more than 10 inhabitants. 2 of the wounded, Sadre Maksudi and Sadik Malai, were transported to the hospital in Vishturi. Before reaching the hospital, the truck was stopped by a Serbian security police patrol. The police ordered the 2 wounded men out of the truck and proceeded to beat and kick them to death. The autopsy report on Sudi Maksudi states that he died as a result of that beating. These are only 6 of the 34 documented cases I referred to before of Albanians killed by police during the pro-democracy demonstrations held in Kosovo between the end of January and the beginning of February of this year. The response of the Serbian government to these rallies was out of step with the rest of Eastern Europe and indeed with the rest of the world. Instead of entering into a dialogue with the Albanian people of Kosovo, the Serbian government dismissed 150 senior Albanian police officers who were then replaced by Serbs and created a new deputy prime ministership with sole responsibility for the maintenance of peace and order within Kosovo. Almost sounds like the ghetto in World War II in Warsaw. By peace and order, the government meant the containment of all Albanian aspirations for autonomy and status as a republic for Kosovo. Self-determination and self-representation were demands which the government said it would never countenance. The Serbian-nominated government of Kosovo resigned in protest of the government of the Republic of Serbia. The continuation of apartheid and the denial of democracy cannot restore political stability either in Yugoslavia or in Kosovo. The United States Congress, Mr. Chairman, has contributed to the liberalization of other countries in Eastern Europe, and I urge that it contribute likewise to the improvement of human rights conditions in Kosovo and Yugoslavia. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much, Congressman DioGuardi.
I have some couple of questions.
I would like to suggest that if any member of the panel has questions, if you take your seat, we'll proceed with questions.
Sure.
Congresswoman Bentley.
I do have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DioGuardi made some very strong statements, and I must say that I do not believe that there have been any threats against any of the lives of those who have come here from Kosovo. That I do not believe, Mr. Chairman, and I know that some of the FBI and others are here because I happened to call them. Me. Now, you also said that there is the fight is between communism versus democracy. How come, since communism is decreasing in Yugoslavia, this problem seems to be rising up to the top? Were conditions under Tito better at that time?
You're asking me.
I'm asking you.
Well,
you made a statement.
I made a statement because I obviously am talking about Serbia, not Slovenia, not Croatia, not Bosnia.
I'm talking.
Because those republics are doing a good job.
Mr. DioGuardi, I ask you a specific question. And that question concerned the rise of the decrease of communism all over Yugoslavia.
Which I applaud, except in Serbia.
Right. Very good. And this problem is now rising. I'm asking you, were the conditions under Tito better? Since that is when communists really reigned.
Let me say this. I didn't spend much time studying Tito in my history books. I was studying Patrick Henry, Thomas Paine, and I could say this, that...
Mr. Chairman, will you ask both sides to refrain from applauding so we can get on with this?
But I can say that recently I've spent a lot of time studying Mr. Milosevic. And let me tell you, he doesn't do himself or his people justice. I met with many prominent Serbs and had many good conversations with them in Belgrade. But the kind of political rancor he is creating for his own personal ambitions will be the undoing of his great republic and the undoing of Yugoslavia if he persists.
Yeah. That, I'm sorry, communism none of us support. But you made a statement about communism, that this was communism versus democracy. And we do know that communism is decreasing all over. And we're all supporting it and we're all pushing for it. But this problem seems to be on the rise, and I'm just saying, I'm asking about the comparison, and you can't answer. Let me ask you a couple of other questions. You call this apartheid. Is there not a University of Pristina which was set up down there, and it is for the Albanians primarily? Do they have that in South Africa?
No, but you know what they're doing now at that university? They've put out the students. They can't stay in the dorms. I mean, what they're doing right now is unconscionable.
We met with many of the students.
Okay, so let me say this.
I'm asking you another question. Is it not true that they have a radio station of their own? Do they have that in South Africa?
Let me say this.
Do they?
You
compare them, Mr. DioGuardi.
No, listen. We can't go with relative justice. We have to
Mr.
go
DioGuardi, you made some very inflammatory statements here.
I did, because Mr. Milosevic has been very inflammatory against the Albanians, and someone has to speak up against them. And thank God we have the Congress of the United States to stand up for oppressed people, including the Kosovars.
Yes, but Mr. DioGuardi, you need to be accurate when you're a witness, especially when you're a lobbyist for a group.
I'm an ethnic Albanian.
Have to be
I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm the president of the Albanian American Civic League and the Albanian American Foundation, and I resent those intonations.
All right. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Chair would like to thank Congressman DioGuardi.
May I respond, please, to...
Of course.
Okay. I would like to say this. I don't indict the Serbian people. I don't question Congresswoman Bentley's motives. She's proud of her ethnic background the way I'm proud of mine. And I applaud her that she could stand up for them the way I stand up for Albanians. And I want to see freedom-loving people everywhere treated the way they're supposed to be treated. But Congresswoman Bentley, the Yugoslav Constitution says that all ethnic groups in Yugoslavia should be treated equally. I think the issue here today is that the Albanians are not getting the same treatment as the other groups, and really that's what this is all about, plus the fact that while communism is on the decrease in Yugoslavia in general, as we've seen with the Slovenian and the Croatian elections, it doesn't seem to be diminishing in Serbia, and that's the problem, because that's where Kosovo is. So let's hope we can all work together. The issue here is to get dialogue. You and I spoke over the weekend, and you said that perhaps we should sit down with Congressman Lantos, and I applaud you for that. I think that we should sit down. I went to speak to Milosevic. He wouldn't speak to me. Now, maybe I'm not the one he wants to speak to, but maybe there are others he should speak to. But how about you and me deciding to meet, to see if we can find reasonable voices on both sides, to put them across the table, to finally get equality for everybody in Yugoslavia, because that's the way it is here in America, and that's God's way.
You know, that is very true, and I did make that statement, Mr. Chairman. However, to get something like that going, you don't come into a session and really throw gasoline on the fire. And I'm sorry, that's what you did today, Mr. DioGuardi.
Well, I hope I didn't,
no other
because
comments
I wanted to be factual, but thank you very much.
I want to thank you very much for your statement, Congressman.
Mr. Chairman,
Congressman Gilman.
I just want to comment that we appreciate Mr. DioGuardi's, Congressman DioGuardi's efforts, not only today but in the past, for his continual fight for human rights, no matter where they may be, whether it's in Albania, whether it's in Yugoslavia, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Ireland, no matter where it is. Congressman DioGuardi has been an outstanding advocate of human rights, and we appreciate his continual efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chairman will now call on his good friend and distinguished colleague from the state of Colorado, Congressman Hank Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me extend my thanks to the Human Rights Caucus for putting on this hearing. Some who don't know America well would wonder why we pay such great attention to human rights around the world. Critics often point out that America has problems too, and indeed we do. But the truth is, we have a special interest. We're not just a country who's made up of many races and many ethnic groups, which we are. It's part of the reason why we take a special interest in human rights around the world. But perhaps even more importantly, we as a people feel we were the first to hold up the torch of human freedom. And while we have many imperfections of our own, we have a continuing interest in the cause of human rights around the world. As the governments of Eastern Europe embrace the idea of freedom, Yugoslavia, who once led the way in Eastern Europe, has not made the progress others have. The democratic forces emerging in Yugoslavia have been met with crackdowns, incarceration of political prisoners, and imposition of martial law. For over a year, Serbian authorities imposed a state of emergency in the province of Kosovo. However, despite oppressive actions taken by the Yugoslav government, democratic political groups have blossomed and are now calling for autonomy and democracy. Since the democratization rallies began last year, hundreds of ethnic Albanians have been imprisoned. According to Amnesty International's 1989 report, many of those jailed stayed in prison for months without being charged and were subject to various forms of torture. State Department's 1989 report on human rights cites the Yugoslav practice of isolation against ethnic Albanians who were involved in the peaceful protest. The report states that 237 ethnic Albanians were rounded up, held for up to 3 months, and were denied access to attorneys and their families. The prisoners were held in Serbian prisons and were subject to beatings, harsh temperatures, inadequate food, and relentless interrogations. Since 1981, the majority of political prisoners in Yugoslavia have been ethnic Albanians. The Yugoslav government recently lifting the state of emergency in the province of Kosovo and its order to pardon 108 political prisoners is clearly a positive step, and it's hopeful that the beginning of a new era of autonomy and democracy can begin throughout all of Yugoslavia. We will have to continue to closely monitor the situation and to ensure that democratic political parties are given the opportunity to hold free elections and the democratic process is given a chance to flourish. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for this opportunity, but I want to reiterate, all Americans have an interest in freedom around the world. Where one suffers, one is denied political rights, ones are enslaved, ones are beaten, Americans must speak out. Our voice must be heard. It's proper for us to have this hearing. It's proper for us to voice concern. And let's hope that our concern is contagious around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll now ask Congressman DioGuardi to introduce various individuals that he has arranged to come up here. We'd be very happy to have you join us up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we've had many people come many miles, I guess, from both sides of the street in Kosovo, and we have here with us some of the most active initiators of democracy, movements for human rights in Kosovo, Albanians. And I want to introduce the first panel, Dr. Ibrahim Rogova. Would you step to the table, please? And Professor Gazman Pula. No? Lutem. Dr. Rogova. Professor Pula. Dr. Rogova, I think, is in the back. He has to come forward. Yes.
What I can try to do is go next door.
Dr. Rogova has been under very strict security since he got off the plane. He has to travel with the State Department security people and the FBI in a bulletproof limousine. So you can imagine, for whatever reason, that's the kind of life Dr. Rogova has to live in order to deliver his message of freedom. He is a writer, a professor, someone who feels strongly about his people in Kosovo. And he's right now president of the Democratic Alliance. It may be perhaps the largest democratic movement right now in the country of Yugoslavia. It has now almost 700,000 members in Kosovo. Over 100,000 of them were card-carrying communists who have burned their Communist Party cards. So we can see that at least democracy is in its embryonic stages in Kosovo. In any case, I have Professor Gazman Pula, also a professor at the University of Pristina. He initiated the Pristina group chapter of the Yugoslav-Helsinki Committee. He's also a spokesperson today for Dr. Zekaria Tsana on behalf of the Council for the Defense of Human Rights and Freedoms in Kosovo. He has a very lengthy paper which he will, Mr. Chairman, submit to the record, outlining very specific acts of violence against ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. And he will also act as an interpreter for Dr. Rogova. Again, gentlemen, the hour is late. I know you came long. We have over 500 Albanians outside waiting for us and waiting to see you. So I would again stress, as Congressman Lantos did, to make the points that must be made and to submit other information for the record. I turn it back to you.
Mr. Rugova, we're very pleased to have you. I remember our breakfast in Pristina not too many months ago, and it's very good to see you and welcome you in Washington. Professor Pula, we are very pleased to have you. As you know, we want you to submit your written presentation for the record and try to summarize your testimony. We are pleased to hear from you. Go ahead.
I'm ready to go first. Okay.
Please pull the mic close to you.
Very close.
Thank you. Honorable Chairman, Congressman Lantos, Congressman Porter, honorable members of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation, honorable Congressman and Senator, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my deep gratitude and appreciation for your esteemed invitation and your interest in the human rights issues in Yugoslavia, especially in Kosovo, where they have been violated most dramatically and almost beyond comprehension for the standards of the civilized Europe towards which we struggle as our principal objective. The principal cause for such drastic violation of human rights of Albanians in Kosovo rests in the fact that due to the historical circumstances during the formation of the newer nations in the Balkans, by the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, just about half of the ethnic Albanians were left out of the formed state of Albania and were encompassed within the Kingdom of Serbia, respectively Yugoslavia. Ever since, within that framework, they've been treated as a foreign body into the majority, that is, into the Serbian national organism that threatens its interest and that was to be eliminated from their soil, forcefully or peacefully, officially or unofficially, quietly assimilated or politically neutralized and suppressed. The official policy, and even more so the actual governmental practice, carried on with a repressive approach toward the Albanians in Yugoslavia. Such an approach produced vast and most drastic violation of individual human rights. Albanians, not only in Kosovo, but in Yugoslavia in general, were subjected to countless violations of their individual human rights, which were meant and amounted to vast violation of their national rights as well. Periods of fierce and less fierce violation of human rights of Albanians in Yugoslavia have changed on and off. For additional information regarding this issue, a paper of mine, which I present in the International Conference in Copenhagen, will be submitted for the record. But I need to say that one of the fiercest periods of repression has come in the 80s, during which, according to officially released figures, at least 75 Albanians were killed by brutal police force interventions. Nevertheless, the minority approach and the second-rate citizen treatment, which ever since the beginning of the century, when Serbia took over the ethnic Albanians in Yugoslavia, has been tried and enforced over the Albanians in Yugoslavia. This approach and the second-rate citizen treatment has definitely proven its bankruptcy. It couldn't have been different, because Albanians in Yugoslavia are not and will not be, according to all demographic and civilizational determinants, a minority neither in relation to other nations in Yugoslavia, nor to the Albanians in Albania proper. The proportion in both states is about 1-to-1, whereas within the Yugoslav Federation, with about 2.5 million people, Albanians are rated the third largest nationality. And this fact is essential to the comprehension of the problem and to the potential, to the dangerous potential it carries if it's not resolved according to the substance it has. Therefore, the way to overcome the very evident problem would be the insistence on establishing the rule of law, concerned with the genuine protection of the human rights of all individuals in Kosovo and Yugoslavia, regardless of nationality and confession. This would have to be combined with an orchestrated insistence of the international community, including positive pressure that would influence Yugoslavia as a member state to observe and live up to the internationally accepted standards of human rights, thus promoting a genuine parliamentary democracy with freedom of speech, free enterprise, freedom of political expression, and the rest that goes with it. A great step in this direction would be the possible establishment of a U.S. consulate in Pristina. We need the U.S. presence in there. It's very essential. The establishment of a consistent and genuine autonomous constitutional status of Kosovo, which would equally provide for the national interests of Albanians in Yugoslavia, just as in the case of other nations of Yugoslavia, could reach the objective. The course for reaching the objective of genuine equality of Kosovo and the human rights of its citizens in Yugoslav Federation, regardless of nationality and confession, may prove to be a difficult task, but in the long run it will be the only just, stable and acceptable resolution of the issue in question. Genuine equality should be the name of the game. Nothing more, but nothing less either. And I have just several more comments I would want to make, because a number of completely unfounded statements have been heard in this hearing. I do believe that the Honorable Congressional Human Rights Foundation will check out the facts prior to taking their stand and cross out the false one, because they were just too many of them launched in this hearing. In the information age, this can be checked out easily. And we believe in it, And we commend the fact that the information age and democracy is doing away with despotism and dictatorship on this earth. Another brief comment, talking about Serbian suffering in Kosovo and Serbia, in Yugoslavia, where the backbone of security apparatus, such as the police, military, as well as the greatest part of the administration, consists of Serbian nationals, is completely or to a very great extent unfounded and hard to believe, not to say unbelievable. And regarding the unfounded accusations such as irredentism, separatism, secessionism, terrorism, and even fundamentalism, I would say that the regime which commits such gross violation of human rights, which we will present in this report, does not have to and is not expected to restrain from forging and leveling false accusation intended to save face in front of the international community who does not and cannot condone such violence and state terror. And last but not least, maybe I should have done that in the very beginning. I'm sorry if I crossed the priorities. I have a personal message from Dr. Tsana, Secretary of our Committee for the Protection of Human Rights and Freedoms. And I should convey that personal message from Mr. Zakaria Tsana, Secretary of our committee, who could not be with us today because his human rights were once again violated by having his passport taken away by the Serbian authorities, as he was charged with a notorious rubber paragraph 133 for carrying on hostile propaganda, a commonly used nonsense in orthodox communist regimes. He sends to all of you, honorable ladies and gentlemen, his best regards, his gratitude and appreciation for the extended invitation and the interest you've shown for the issue, and to the gentlemen of the Congressional, ladies and gentlemen of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation, and to the great American nation which has shown the interest and support for the cause of human rights in the world over, including, hopefully, and at last, Kosovo or Yugoslavia. Besides this, he sends to this honorable auditorium our committee's latest report. On the most drastic cases of human rights violations on a day-by-day basis, on a blow-by-blow basis, name-by-name basis, which I will submit for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Je dois parler en albanais après mais très court, Monsieur Chairman.
He'll speak in Albanian and Gazman Pula will translate.
Zoti kryetar,
Honorable Mr. Chairman,
ju falenderojmë që na keni ftuar të flasim në këtë altar të mendimit të lirë dhe të drejtave të njerëzit dhe të demokracisë.
we express our gratitude and appreciation for your invitation to call in this Freedom House and to in this house where human rights and humanitarian affairs are the topic.
Me këtë keni nderuar popullin shqiptar në Kosovë dhe kudo që gjinet në botë.
You've shown the respect and the honor for the Albanian people wherever they live with this invitation and concern of yours.
Unë do të ndalem vetëm te problemi I demokracisë.
I will address only the issue of democracy
në Kosovë.
In Kosovo,
sepse demokracia është e drejtë e njeriut sipas standardeve moderne.
Because the democracy is a human rights belonging according to all internationally accepted standards.
Dhe po ashtu kësaj demokracie në janar të këtij viti shqiptarët I brohoritën dhe për këtë e paguan me kokë.
To this democracy, the Albanians in Yugoslavia chanted this at the beginning of this year, but the price was their lives.
Por shqiptarët janë të vendosur që vetëm me demokraci dhe me mjete paqësore mund të zgjidhet problemi I Kosovës.
Nevertheless, Albanians are committed that only the democracy and democratic means will bring about resolution of the Albanian issue.
Po ashtu, edhe vetmja mundësi është që të hapet dialogu në mes të zyrtarëve dhe përfaqësuesve të gjitha palëve të interesuara në Kosovë.
The only way of going ahead with democratic movements is a dialogue which would take as partners, besides the authorities, the alternative political organizations in Kosovo, such as ourselves.
Po ashtu, shqiptarët insistojnë që krahas demokracisë ta kenë edhe autonominë dhe pavarësinë e vet në kuadër të Federatës Jugoslave.
Albanians insist as well that besides having the democratic mechanism and the democratic governmental structure put in motion, they have also granted their autonomy and their political subjectivity.
Para sa ditësh formalisht u hoq gjendja jashtëzakonshme në Kosovë.
Several days ago, the state of emergency in Kosovo was formally lifted
Nga qeveria federale.
From the federal authorities.
Por kjo u zëvendësuar me gjendjen e jashtëzakonshme që do të jetë rregullt nga Republika e Serbisë.
But this was immediately replaced with a state of emergency from the Republic of Serbia or Republican level, with their police and with the intention of turning the state of emergency into a regular state of affairs and business as usual practice in Kosovo.
Tash thonë se po funksionon shteti juridik, por do të kisha thënë dhe është e vërtetë se po funksionon shteti policor e jo juridik.
They're saying, or rather they're claiming that the rule of law is now governing in Kosovo. But I would rather say that the police state or the rule of police force is governing now in Kosovo.
Dhe do të dy-tri observacionet mia rreth disa çështjeve që janë të propagandës të serbëve dhe të presit të Beogradit.
Several comments of mine that would refer to the propaganda approach to the Albanian issue in Yugoslavia from the Belgrade media.
Kërkesën për demokraci dhe autonomi, kjo propagandë përpiqet ta paraqet si konflikt religioz.
The aspirations for democracy and autonomy of Albanians and for democracy and autonomy in the state of Yugoslavia, this propaganda tends to present as a religious and ethnic conflict,
që nuk është e vërtetë,
which is not true.
Sepse në pikpamje fetare shqiptarët janë shumë tolerant.
Because in the confessional sense, the Albanians are very tolerant.
Sepse vetë shqiptarët I kanë tri fe.
Because all three major religions are present in the nation, in the Albanian nation. I would not count them specifically, but they are the Christian and Muslim religion, both of them, and Orthodox and Roman Catholic, their proportion being 2/3 and 1/3.
Tolerancën që kanë pasur brenda bashkësisë vet gjithmonë e kanë treguar edhe ndaj të tjerëve.
The tolerance that they have, the interconfessional tolerance that they have exercised within their own nation, they have exercised with their neighbors and with the other nations as well.
Dhe po ashtu si një popull antik, pastaj mesjetar kur ka qenë kristian, shqiptarët vazhdimisht kanë mbajtur tolerancë në raporte me të tjerë.
And as an ancient nations, together with the Greeks, and as a medieval nation when they were Christians before the Turks came, and they stood on further on for a certain time, they have shown great tolerance in their relations with the neighboring medieval nations, so to say.
Por propaganda serbe vepron kësaj, shqiptarët herë akuzon se janë të lidhur me Vatikanin, herë me fundamentalizmin, herë me Komintermin që kanë qenë përpara.
But the Serbian propaganda acts like that. It accuses Albanians of being linked once with the Vatican, next time with the Islamic fundamentalists, and the third time with the Comintern from Moscow.
Dhe në kohë të fundit kërkon që të identifikohet me fatin e popullit hebrej, me holokaustin hebrej, që s'është e vërtet dhe s'ka të bëj përkundrazi, gjithmonë kanë dominuar në Jugosllavi dhe në Kosovë.
And in the recent years, since they find it suitable, they've tried to make parallels of their issue with a Jewish issue. But of course, that does not stand to be true, because on the contrary, they have always been the ones very present in the government, in the security apparatus, and they have always been, so to say, the bosses, the people in charge, the nationality in charge, in Yugoslavia at least.
Prandaj propaganda është mjaft e dukshme dhe besoj se përmes një dialogu që do të hapet në të ardhmen dhe që është e vetmja rrugë, atëherë do të gjinet zgjidhja për jetë të qetë, liri dhe demokraci në Kosovë.
Therefore, since this propaganda is very transparent and it's very evident, very unfounded, we believe that they will come to recognize the fact that the dialogue and the democratic means will be the only way of resolution of this question.
Ne intelektualet shqiptarë, edhe pse në kushte të jashtëzakonshme kemi filluar grupet politike për demokraci në Kosovë.
We, the Albanian intellectuals, although in very, very hard conditions, in grave conditions, so to say, under the state of emergency, have started out with a political organization on democratic basis.
Dhe sot krejt qeveria serbe dhe presi i Beogradit janë ngritur kundër këtyre grupeve politike vetëm për t'i penguar proceset demokratike në Kosovë.
And now you have the situation in which the Serbian authorities in Belgrade, as well as the media run by these authorities in Belgrade, have launched an intensive propaganda campaign trying to denounce and renounce these democratic movements and winds that are blowing in Kosovo as well.
Dhe në fund kërkoj falje që nuk e kam shkruar tekstin tim, sepse kam menduar se do të më kontrollojnë në aeroport Beogradit.
In the end, I'd like to try to excuse myself for not writing my speech, my address to this honorable auditorium, but I did not do so because I had to go through the customs and through the checkout in the Belgrade airport.
Kjo më ka ndodhur para sa kohë dhe atë ditë po ashtu tentuan të më kontrollojnë, por u bëra kokfort dhe vazhdova në dogan.
That has happened to me before, and that could have happened, and that was about to happen to me this time too, but I was somewhat more stubborn and did not and avoided the thorough checkup.
Dhe shembullimi konkret e vërteton se sa kemi të bëjmë me drejtat njerëzit për shqiptarët dhe personalisht për intelektualët shqiptar.
This specific example is one more assertion and confirmation to the effect of how grossly and how harshly, egregiously the human rights of Albanians in Yugoslavia are violated and abused.
Dhe mund të them se gati nuk ka mbetur shqiptar që nuk është prekur dhe nuk ka kaluar në përdorjet e policisë, duke përfshirë edhe veten.
I would add to this statement that there are almost no Albanians in Yugoslavia left who have not been or have not received some kind of police treatment. One of such being Mr. Rugova himself.
Kjo nuk do në koment dhe po e përfundoj me një proverb shqiptar.
This requires no comment, and I will end with a proverb with an Albanian proverb.
Miku I mirë njihet në ditë të vështira.
Saying that the good friend is to be proven in hard times.
Ju faleminderit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to have both of you with us, and we hope you'll be able to stay and visit various parts of the United States before you return.
We're going to add two gentlemen that will make very short statements, but the the gist of the panel will be Dr. Recep Çosa, and I'd like Dr. Çosa to come to the table. He's a professor from the University of Pristina, professor of literature. No demonstrations, please. Hands down, please. Yeah. And also Professor Lulieta Pula-Biciri. She's the sister of Professor Gazman Pula. Is she here? Professor Biciri? Yes. She is also a professor at the University of Pristina, and she's president of the Women's Association of the Democratic Alliance of Kosovo. And also, I'd like to, would you sit in the middle, please? If she would move to the middle. I'd like Mamadan Ramalaku, ambassador, former ambassador from Yugoslavia to the United States, an ethnic Albanian, to be at the podium, and Dr. Samir Rapishti. And we'll make this the final panel, and each have promised me, although they've come many, many miles, except for Dr. Rapishti, who lives here in the New York area. And Dr. Rapishti has been a historian for Kosovo. And I see we have Professor Pula again for some interpretation. Again, the hour is late. We have hundreds of our ethnic Albanians outside who want to greet you, and I know that, and before you start, I want to again thank everyone for their patience. It is not easy to represent two points of view which seems to be so disparate, but that's what this forum is all about, to hear both sides so that we can shed light, not heat, on the situation. Heat has been shed for 500 years and has gone nowhere. It's time that we try something new, and that's what this dialogue is all about. Hopefully this dialogue will be a signal to the authorities in Serbia and the voices of the Albanians in Kosovo to get together and finally settle their differences so people can live free. That is what I believe human nature and God's laws are all about. So with that, Professor Çosa, keep your statements short, submit longer statements for the record, please.
Honorable Mr. Chairman.
Professor Pula, pull a mic fairly close to you.
Pull the mics closer. And
not too close.
And by the way, I know that Professor Dr. Çosa has a written statement in English, so if he could start off with some Albanian, then you can take over and read the entire statement as opposed to going back and forth. Okay?
Nuk jam antar asnjë partie. Do të thotë jam intelektual I pavarur.
I'm not a member of any party. I'm an independent intellectual.
Kam kënaqësinë që në këtë institucion të lartë
I have the pleasure that in this highly esteemed institution
që simbolizon shembullin e demokracisë parlamentare
that symbolizes the best of parliamentary democracy
dhe të drejtësisë planetare
and of planetary justice,
të paraqes disa të dhëna
to present some facts and data
mbi terrorin 10 vjeçar të Serbisë mbi popullin shqiptar.
About the 10-year-old terror of the Serbian authorities over the Albanians in Kosovo.
Tekstin tim do ta lexoj bashkëpunëtori im.
My text will be presented by interpreter in this, our colleague interpreter in this case, myself. Years of state violence. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, the historical memory of the Albanian people is full of old wounds as well as new ones. In our history, there are periods which we call tragical, and among them, as especially tragic one, the last decade will be remembered. Even before this time, we have tasted all the forms of violence brought up by the totalitarian communist regime. But the forms of violence which we have suffered during the last decade in Kosovo are very diverse and very brutal. For 10 years now, we have been living under the state of emergency, which has been repeated 3 times, and which was held by continuously more sophisticated means, methods, and instruments. These were years of the most cruel aggression against the elementary rights of the individual, the family, and the Albanian people in general in Yugoslavia. During the 10 last years, the regime has deprived the right of living to more than 100 Albanians, including young and old, which could not even be buried freely, nor could flowers be laid over their graves. nor their graves be marked down. Some several hundred persons were wounded by firearms, while only in January and February of this year, 204 youngsters and children were wounded. Several Albanians were found shot dead on the roadsides, some drowned in the rivers. Some were sent to their families in wooden boxes with the explanation that they had committed suicide by hanging themselves or by jumping from the prison windows. Some were never found. Many Albanians running away from the repression have found shelter in many countries of Western Europe and Turkey. Some more hundreds were taken in isolation in the prisons of Serbia, where they were physically abused as well as psychologically, where they had no right of defense and no right of family visits. According to official data, up to 1988 in Kosovo alone, the police and its courts have given police treatment to 584,373 Albanians, against 70,000 of which charges were brought. But the exact picture of tragic dimensions of the violence committed by the regime against the Albanian people can be created if we add to this number that of the Albanians purged in Macedonia, Montenegro, in the Yugoslav army, and in Kosovo after 1988. Instead of producing valuable industrial goods, for 10 years Kosovo has been producing Albanian political prisoners who filled Yugoslav jails. Their living conditions in jails represent a special tragedy, although they are more bearable than the preliminary procedures at the police custody, which may last up to 9 months. During the last years, we have endured the violence of the so-called differentiation. It is a demonic invention of Stalinism, to which party members must submit in other communist countries, while in Kosovo, the entire Albanian people. In the name of this kind of segregation, to many of our children, the right to go to school or to study has been denied. To many teachers, their right to work in schools and universities. To many workers, their right to work. And to many of our brothers, their right to be free. For years we were afraid to speak up freely, but also to keep our mouths shut. We must speak what we don't believe in, and not to speak what we believe in. We dare not dress up in red and black, the color of our national flag. We're not free to give the names we like to our children, nor to honor the names of the culture we honor. We are not free to meet each other freely, visit some friends at their homes, or have them come to ours. The preventive censorship hurts seriously our spiritual creativity, and the knockings of the police on the doors of our homes or offices hurt heavily the health of our people. We have become today a people that solely thinks on how to survive. There is no higher sense for them to seek, because when they seek more national rights, we're called nationalists. When we seek a higher degree of equality, we are called separatists. When we seek political rights and free election, they call us terrorists. Although there is never violence into our hands, and in all these cases they imprison, they wound and kill our youth, our future. Anything we seek, they declare us guilty, because for the Serbian regime we are guilty for being as many as we are, and for living where we live ever since history knows for us. This is how it was until now, but how it will be tomorrow. On April 17th, the state of emergency in Kosovo was declared regular by Serbia, thus making a tragic situation permanent. We may now say what we like about the state, but the state, as up to now, can do anything it wants with our people. The victory of force over the right and justice has been declared legal, just as the violent ruining of the autonomy of Kosovo last year was declared legitimate. The great American statesman of 18th century, Patrick Henry, said, "I know of no other way of judging the future but from the past." If we are to lean on our past experience in Kosovo, I may say, for our individual and collective rights, for our existence as a people, another period of insecurity is about to begin. And in this period, our being may tragically be devaluated if our destiny in the Yugoslav Federation is not guaranteed in a way the destiny of other people in Yugoslavia is guaranteed. If the status of the Republic is not recognized to Kosovo, Yugoslavia as a federation is built on the ethnical principle, and the rights of the individual and citizens in it are conditioned by the rights of the people. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, God has not yet looked after the Albanians, But when their intellectuals are invited to be heard by such a high institution with a planetary moral might such as this one, we may hope that finally the Almighty God too will grant them his look of love. Let it be so. Thank you for listening to me with attention.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Professor Lieta Pulupiciri. Again, she's the president of the Women's Association of the Democratic Alliance of Kosovo and works very closely with Dr. Ibrahim Rugova.
We're very pleased to have you.
Zonja dhe zotërinj,
Honorable ladies and gentlemen,
fjala ime e rastit i është shpërndar këtij tubimi.
My
Vetëm do ta shfrytëzoj rastin që të prezantoj edhe disa momente që nuk janë përfshirë në te.
my opening statement has been distributed in this honorable institution, but I will use the opportunity in which to make several remarks I wasn't able to present in the paper.
Prezantoj gratë e Kosovës të organizuara në shoqatën e cila funksionon në kuadër të lidhjes demokratike të Kosovës.
I am the president, the chairman of the Women's Association of the Democratic Alliance of Kosovo.
Tani për tani ajo numëron 80,000 antar.
Up to now, its membership goes as high as 80,000 members.
Kjo shifër impozante e cila çdo ditë rritet jashtë çdo parashikimi dëshmon më së miri për faktin se represioni që ushtrohet mbi popullsinë e pafajshme shqiptare në Kosovë ka arritur atë shkallë alarmante saqë të aktivizoj e të mobilizoj një shtresë natyralisht politikisht imobile siç janë gratë dhe atë gratë e të gjitha kategorive.
The number of the members which are consistently rising is a proof to the effect that the drastic human rights violations and abuses to which the Albanian population in Kosovo is subjected has moved a traditionally not very mobile segment of a society such as women of all social layers.
Flas pra në emër të nënave kosovare.
I'm talking on behalf of the Albanian mothers.
Ne angazhohemi kundër zgjidhjes problemit të Kosovës me dhunë e represion.
We are engaged for the resolution of the Albanian problem in Yugoslavia without repression and with democratic means.
Dhe mendojmë se zgjidhja permanente e problemit të Kosovës mund të arrihet vetëm me dialog me alternativën kosovare, e cila tani më është dëshmuar dhe ka fituar legitimitetin e përfaqësuesit autentik të popullsisë shqiptare në Kosovë.
We think that the Albanian issue in Yugoslavia can be resolved only in dialogue of the authorities with alternative political organizations of Kosovo, such as ourselves, in a democratic dialogue which will bring up an impartial and all-sided view of the problem.
Sepse pa pjesëmarrjen aktive të subjektit shqiptar, çdo zgjidhje është paraprakisht e dënuar të dështojë.
Because without the active engagement of the political subjectivity of the Albanians, every other solution that might be imposed by force or otherwise is destined or doomed to fail.
Jemi për demokraci parlamentare, për zgjedhje të lira, sistem shumë partijak, për pranimin e subjektivitetit politik të popullit shqiptar, për barazi të plot me gjithë popujt të tjerë të Jugosllavisë dhe për pranimin e subjektivitetit politiko-juridik të Kosovës, i cili do të duhet të sankcionohet me shprehjen e lirë të vullnetit politik të popullit.
We are for free elections. We are for the freedom of speech, freedom of press. In one word, for parliamentary democracy. We are for the establishment of a just constitutional status of Kosovo that would grant equality to the Albanian population, to Kosovo within the Yugoslav Federation, to a political subjectivity which will be the same and equal as to that of the other nations in Yugoslavia.
Dua të shpreh një mendim I cili është shumë I përhapur në mes të shqiptarëve në Kosovë.
I will express on this occasion a widespread opinion among the Albanians of Kosovo.
E ajo është se forcat unitariste të autoriteteve serbe ushtrojnë terror të pakuptueshëm mbi popullatën e pafajshme shqiptare me qëllim të paramenduar mirë të nxitjes së shpërthimit masiv të revoltës, që më pastaj do të shfrytëzohej si casus belli për represalje shtetërore dhe qërim brutal hesapesh me popullatën shqiptare.
This widespread opinion among the Albanians is that the authorities, the Serbian authorities, the dark forces within the Serbian authorities do apply this incomprehensible police violence and state terror over the Albanians in order to incite a popular revolt on behalf of the Albanians, which would in turn then be used as a casus belli or as a pretext for a much larger scale or a massive scale massacres and reprisal of Albanian population in Yugoslavia, and push away once more and hopefully for longer the democratization of the democracy that is sweeping Europe and is reaching Kosovo as well.
Konsiderohet se ky opsion hegemonist serbomadh konsiston në pengimin e demokratizimit dhe mbajtjen e vazhduar të gjendjes konflikte dhe të tensionit në Kosovë, dhe nëpërmjet të mbajtjes së Kosovës me terror e dhunë, sheh të vetmën mundësi për t'i zgjatur jetën një politike tërësisht të dështuar, e cila nuk i solli as nuk do t'i sjell as gjë të mirë as Kosovës e as Jugosllavisë, dhe si e tillë paraqet rrezik të madh për Ballkan dhe Europë.
This seems to be the only approach by which the Orthodox part of the communist regime in Serbia wants and intends to push away the democratic winds in order to manipulate even their own population, the Serbian population, with the fact of the allegedly jeopardized Serbian national interest in Kosovo, in order to put away the real problem which the Serbian population as well has, not only in Kosovo but in Serbia proper as well, and to hold on to the power. They think that this seems to be the only way, but the way which has not brought anything good, neither to Yugoslavia nor to Serbia, and of course at least to Kosovo.
Ky opcion mund të kuptohet edhe si nevojë për tërheqjen e vëmendjes së opinionit serb nga problemet e veta të brendshme, si formë standarde e regjimeve komuniste, duke përfshirë prodhimin permanent dhe manipulimin me pasione nacionaliste.
This seems to be the standard Orthodox communist regime's approach by which to turn the attention of their own people to the outside enemy, and to the national interest being jeopardized, being endangered by the outside forces.
Ky mendim të jetë prezent në popullsinë shqiptare në Kosovë mbështetet në vrasjet brutale, plagosjet, rrafjet, torturat, burgimet, bastisjet, helmimet masive të nxënësve dhe shumë forma të tjera të dhunës së egër policore të pakuptueshme për Europën e civilizuar.
This opinion among the Albanians is based and supported on the incomprehensible police violence against the Albanians, on the brutal killings, woundings, maltreatments, harassment, unwarranted house raids, beatings, and even the massive poisoning of the Albanian high school and elementary school students in the recent days.
How much longer is the witness's testimony? Because we would like to wrap up fairly soon.
Vetëm edhe pak.
One more comment.
Të drejtat njerëzore të fëmijëve grave dhe familjeve në tërësi në Kosovë shkilen brutalisht dhe në mënyrë konsistente e sistematike, për çfarësy me të drejtë kërkojmë një mbikëqyrje ndërkombëtare.
The human rights of women and children in Kosovo are being consistently and systematically abused and violated, to that extent that we do ask for an independent international commission that would come and survey what's going on and take their stand on the matter.
Do të më vinte mirë po të jetë mundur që fondacioni të parashtrojë këto dëshmi plotësuese për shkeljen e këtyre të drejtave që I përmenda.
I will be glad to present the Honorable Congressional Human Rights Foundation with the following evidence that would support my presentation.
Një numër fotografish të njerëzve të goditur nga dhuna brutale policore.
A number of photographs of the people being affected by the police violence in Kosovo.
Një incizim në videokasetë të një vajze të helmuar 18 vjeçare dhe pasojat e helmimit të saj, të cilën e solli nëna e saj, antare e shoqatës sonë.
A video cassette recording of the poisoning attacks that an 18-year-old girl has suffered in her home, and has been recorded by the members of her family and was brought to me by the lady which is a member of our Women's Association.
Një raport mjekësor për kronologjinë e nxënësve të hospitalizuar në Kosovë.
A report of the recent poisoning of students and children in Kosovo.
Raporti I konziliumit spitalit në Prishtinë, lidhur me simptomatologjinë e të helmuarve, I nënshkruar edhe nga mjekët serb, të cilët pastaj hoqën dorë nga ai.
A report of the Consilium of the Pristina University Hospital, in which the Consilium of Doctors, which consists of Serbian and Albanian nationals, 50% each, have signed and described the symptomatology of the poisoning that has taken place in Kosovo these last recent days.
Incizimi në videokaset të vrasjes së 17-vjeçares Ylfete Humolli nga Podujeva, që është prezantuar në ditarin e televizionit Prishtinës, ku shihet vrasësi, ndërsa në raportin e gjerë, të cilin e dha Këshilli Ekzekutiv Federativ lidhur me këtë, thuhet se është vrarë në rrethana të panjohura.
A video cassette recording of the killing of a 17-year-old girl, Ylfete Humolli, which was made by a TV Sarajevo crew accidentally, who happened to be there, and for which case the officials, the federal officials, have said that it has happened in unclear circumstances.
Një numër deklaratash rënqesës të fëmijëve dhe grave të familjes së bastisur Gubetinin nga Nedakovci, të cilat kishin me qenë të mira për rubrikën besuat ose jo, kjo ngjan në Kosovë.
A number of written personal declarations about the human rights violations, drastic human rights violations that these individuals of the Gubetini family in Nedakovs have been subjected to, and which would be very, very fitting for the believe it or not Ripley rubric.
Okay, we will accept all these for the record. Are there many more? Because
Mbi 70 deklarata të nxënësve të helmuar që ju dorëzuan shoqatës, si dhe fotografitë përkatëse.
And 70 written declarations about the cases of poisoning cases.
Dhe në fund më lejoni të shpreh kënaqësinë dhe konsideratat tona për vullnetin e gatishmërinë e juaj për të na dëgjuar dhe të themi se shpresat tona të mbetura për zgjidhjen e problemit të Kosovës I mbështesim në veprimin e presionit ndërkombëtar.
And last but not least, let me express my gratitude and appreciation for the interest you've taken in this issue. And we believe that only the international pressure about observation and the observation of human rights will bring up a resolution of the question of the question that we've discussed.
I samo još jednu stvar. Čula se nekoliko pitanja ovdje I ukoliko bude vremena, ja sam spremna da na njih dajem odgovore, ako ste vi spremni da me saslušate.
And my final comment is that the questions that have been raised here in this hearing and that have been addressed to us, if the honorable auditorium is ready to listen, I will be ready to answer.
We thank you very much for your presentation. Let me just caution the balance of the panel that we have run about 2.5 hours beyond our allotted time. The chair will have to leave very shortly, and I will have to ask you to make your statement as brief as possible.
I have to second that, and I know Dr. Rapishti, originally you were supposed to testify, but with so many people coming over from Kosovo, we felt it was appropriate to let the representatives there speak. And I know how eloquent you can be and how many statements you've made, but if you can really be very short and submit your statements for the record, we would really appreciate it. And if you pull the mic up on it.
Mr. Chairman, I am submitting my written statement for the record with your permission. I have very little to say. The problem of Kosovo is political and human. I have lost 2 people during World War II, including my father. I have spent 11 years in jail, in communist jails of Albania and Yugoslavia. I am therefore very sensitive to the violation of human rights. I will say only the following. A week ago, Adem Demaci, which we call the Nelson Mandela of Kosovo, was released. We are very pleased with it. Last year, I believe it was in June, he gave an interview to the semi-official newspaper Borba in Belgrade. I'll try to relate the best of my ability. Question, what do you think about the Serbs? Demaci, Serbs are a generous people with a glorious past. Question, we are told that you hate the Serbs. Demaci smiles, right bore by and answered, if danger would threaten my son or a Serbian neighbor, I would tell the danger, take my son. This is the terrorist, quote unquote, Demaci, who spent 27 years in jail. Mr. Chairman, I cannot find a greener branch of olive than this. Today, I take that olive branch and I appeal to all my Serbian friends. Let's work together for freedom, for democracy, and general prosperity. Together, we will succeed. Divided, we will both perish. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, it is my pleasure to call on Congresswoman Helen Dalich-Bentley, who will make a statement and then introduce several of the witnesses who were brought here through the courtesy of her efforts. Congresswoman Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Mr. Chairman, you and I have talked about this many times, and I do want to commend you and thank you for holding this hearing and for holding it together. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I am of Serbian background. My parents were both immigrants to this country many years ago, and I'm very proud of that background. I also am proud to be a member of the Human Rights Caucus on the Executive Committee in order to support all of the efforts for human rights all around the world. But, Mr. Chairman, I have to say that who would have thought 600 years ago that the Second Battle of Kosovo would take place in the halls of the United States Congress? Only this past week, Albania has indicated for the very first time that it is interested in establishing any dialogue with the outside world, the first time in 45 years. And yet it's already been said, Mr. Chairman, I won't repeat it, that Yugoslavia has been the most open of the East European countries. Now it is one that's dragging its feet in throwing down communism, and we all want it to move into that world very, very fast and to become a truly democratic country as fast as possible. Now, I do want to point out the gentleman from Freedom House mentioned about the economic problems there. When we met with President Markovic, Mr. Chairman, he did say that they had the inflation under control. In fact, it's down to zero. And they have made tremendous turnarounds, and I'm very pleased to read over the weekend that President Markovic of Yugoslavia said there would be multi-party elections on a federal or national basis of that country before the end of this year, or at least early next year. And we know that the republics of Slovenia and Croatia have already had these, and hopefully the other republics, including Serbia, will be doing so in the forthcoming months as well. These are all some positive moves that are tied in also with the turnaround of the economy. And we're asking, Mr. Chairman, is there any room for improvement of human rights? You bet there is, throughout Yugoslavia in every way. Has progress been made? Yes, it has. And some of those points have been outlined. I won't repeat them. I will simply say that I did have the occasion of sitting next to Mrs. Vlassi during dinner while we were in Kosovo 2 weeks ago, and I told her that I had pushed hard for at least an open trial for her husband. And I'm very glad that it was open, and I'm very glad that the courts have set him free and set the others free. Now, Mr. Chairman, there are many other bits concerning human rights, and that time is running out. I do want to say this in summary, though, that for the benefit of all of the republics and all the peoples of Yugoslavia, that it is vital that whatever happens over there is that the country remains intact, because the dismantling of Yugoslavia could be a severe blow to all of Europe and to the Western world, and that is something that we must try in every way to prevent from happening. I'm very pleased, Mr. Chairman, to introduce Mr. Dobrica Ćosić, who is regarded today as the greatest living Serbian writer. His novel, Time of Death, as a matter of fact, set during World War I, is a classic work and has been published in translation in the United States. During World War II, he fought with the partisan guerrilla forces against the Germans. He was a member of the Yugoslav parliament from 1945 to 56. In 1968, he left the parliament and was expelled from the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Since then, he's been an active opponent of the present government and is doing all he can to establish a democratic, multi-party system in Yugoslavia. In 1984, he founded the first Committee for Human Rights and Free Expression in Yugoslavia, and that committee defends those persons politically charged or politically discriminated against from all the nations of Yugoslavia and from all walks of life throughout the country. I might also point out, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Ćosić was active in the freeing of Mr. Paraga from prison. And since he does not speak English, he has come with a translation of his report, which will be read by our interpreter.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Bentley, for this very eloquent introduction. Mr. Ćosić, we are very pleased to have you, and we are looking forward to reading a translation of your statement. If you'll pull the mic close to you, we'll be able to hear better.
Gospodine predsjedniče, dame i gospodo, pred vama ne zastupam srpsku naciju, ni srpsku i jugoslovensku državu, ni jednu političku partiju. Predsjedavam Odboru za odbranu slobode misli i izražavanja, prvom komitetu za zaštitu ljudskih i građanskih prava u Jugoslaviji, osnovano 1984. godine, koji brani ljudska i građanska prava na jugoslovenskom tlu bez obzira na nacionalnu, religijsku i ideološku pripadnost ugroženih ljudi. Danas pred vama ne govorim ni u ime tog komiteta.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am not representing here either the Serbian nation or the Serbian or Yugoslav state, or for that matter, any political party. I preside over the Board for Defense of Freedom of Thought and Speech, which was the first committee for civil rights protection in Yugoslavia, established in 1984, which was a committee which defends human and civil rights in Yugoslavia, on Yugoslav soil, regardless of nationality, creed, political ideology, so long as they involve people imperiled in any way. Today, however, I do not speak on behalf of that committee either. I came here prompted by my conscience. Prompted by my conscience, I responded to your invitation.
Can you pull the mic a little closer to you so they'll hear you in the back?
Prompted by my conscience.
Better. Much better.
I came here to try and shed light on the true condition of human rights in Yugoslavia. The difficulty in understanding Yugoslav's situation, especially in Kosovo, because of international prejudices and reluctances to grasp historical and social roots and the genesis of national, religious, and ideological antagonisms in Yugoslavia, and the ones which are more and more intensified. All these have caused one of the biggest political untruths to be born in Europe and in America in recent times. I'm speaking about the untruth concerning Kosovo and the untruth concerning Serbia. These political untruths or lies have become a strong international factor in the dismantling of Yugoslavia, a factor in the deteriorating relations between the nations of Yugoslavia and the nations in the Balkans, a factor of the genuine historical tragedy of Serbian and Albanian peoples today. And if the events in Kosovo today are not reversed, Yugoslavia and that whole region of the Balkans may not exist tomorrow. In principle, I do not recognize either the ability or the right of any tribunal to judge what is freedom, what is truth and democracy in the contemporary world. It is difficult for me to acknowledge, to assign that judicial role in assessing the misfortunes in my country to any political parliament of a foreign country, even if such parliament is the one of the most democratic country in the world, the United States of America. But I accepted their invitation because I believe that human rights are a universal problem, the problem of our entire civilization. I therefore speak to you confident that democracy and the conscience of the American people, the people who have fought together with the Serbs in 2 world wars, defending the cause of freedom and democracy, will prevail. Forgive me if I voice my dissatisfaction with the findings of the Congress Helsinki Commission concerning the human and civil rights in Yugoslavia, and particularly in Kosovo. This report has upset not only me, it has upset the entire democratic community in Serbia and in Yugoslavia. Serbs, particularly Serbs in Kosovo, interviewed by the Helsinki Commission, cannot understand why American congressmen failed to mention their sufferings, their statements, the verifiable statements concerning violence and criminal offenses committed during the decades by Albanians against the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija. Crimes which were committed for the sole purpose of creating an ethnically pure Kosovo and establishing a great state of Albania. Without wishing to impugn the good intentions and proclaimed impartiality of the Helsinki Commission, I must, however, say that human rights are not violated in Kosovo alone, and that Albanians in Kosovo are far from being the only victims of the violation of human rights. The Serbs are the greater victim of such violations, because Serbs are the minority. And until these very days, they have been deprived of the rights by the very state authorities dominated by Albanians, of their human rights. Human rights and civil liberties, as we would like to see them in the civilized world, do not exist in the entire territory of Yugoslavia. I appeal to you to take into consideration that unless in your assessments and viewpoints there is no deeper understanding of the truth, no better knowledge of social situation and relations between the nations in Yugoslavia, and particularly between Serbian and Albanian nations, the standpoints of the Helsinki Commission of the American Congress would amount only to the factor of intensification. They would, in fact, simply intensify national, political, and religious confrontations in Kosovo, in Yugoslavia, and in the entire Balkans. In order to know the integral truth concerning the existential crisis in Yugoslavia, a crisis where civil rights problems are but a part of the complex of misfortunes and problems, one should master the history of Yugoslav peoples. No contemporary social or national problem may be understood in Europe, and especially in the Balkans and Yugoslavia, unless its historical roots and its genesis are known. Although Yugoslavia has been the most liberal among the countries dominated by the Communist Party, that country under Tito's autocracy did not become a democratic society. So long as Titoism, with its political monopoly of the Communist Party, the social order created by ideology of Bolshevism and Comintern Titoist Party, so long as they exist, human and civil rights shall continue to be restricted in that country. Thorough democratic transformation taking place in recent years in Yugoslavia has significantly extended the scope of political freedoms, and especially of scientific, academic, and artistic thinking, of political speech and organizing. But still, not all basic human and civil rights have been achieved and institutionalized. The party state is slow to change into a state based on laws. Monistic political society is not yet established in the entire country, nor is a pluralistic society. But the strivings for a democratic order have begun and are irreversible, and there is no doubt that they are going to change the old order, which is dying. The greatest discontent that is felt over the issue of human rights is noted in the area of national rights. And such discontent is the deepest in the hearts of the Serbian people. The Serbs are the most numerous among Yugoslav nations, and they are the most degraded and the most subjugated in the Yugoslav multinational state. This degradation and subjugation caused by the ideology of an erroneous national policy instituted by Tito and the Comintern party then in power. Such emphasis on Serbian issues does not, however, exclude the fact that discontent and frustration are felt among other Yugoslav peoples regarding the realization of their human rights, although this does not apply to their national rights, which are fully recognized. For instance, in the Republic of Slovenia, more than 200,000 workers of various Yugoslav nations, ironically all called Bosnians, and Bosnians here is used as a term of derogatory description, are nationally discriminated against and socially degraded. In the coastal area of the Slovenian Republic, after World War II, there was an exodus of the Italian population which jeopardized the position of the remaining Italians remaining in Slovenia. Chauvinism is the very essence of Slovene national ideology, and it is favored by all Slovenian political parties now in existence. A society where xenophobia is a collective feeling cannot be a genuinely democratic society. In Croatia, the policy of national assimilation of Serbs, Italians has been going on for decades. Some 600 to 700,000 Serbs in Croatia are deprived of elementary cultural rights, language, school, press, national institutions, all those rights without which a man loses his historical, spiritual, and national identity. Such state of affairs, together with inequality in the sphere of the economy, gave rise to permanent emigrations of the Serbs out of Croatia. Moreover, the Serbophobia of major political parties, which base their programs on the exclusivity of Croatian national ideology, maintain among the Serbs the fear that the recurrence of the Ustaši genocide, which took place during World War II, may happen again. In the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, ethnic and political favoring of the Muslim population, as contrasted to the Serbian and Croatian ones, is more and more pervaded by the militant Islam expansionism coming to us from the Middle East. This has caused depression, psychological and social feelings of inequality as well, and it has led to a migration of Christian Serbs and Croats, but more particularly of Orthodox Serbs, out of Bosnia and Herzegovina, against the Serbs against whom the Muslim population has been towards whom the Muslim population has been traditionally antagonistic. One cannot ignore the aggression of Islam in recent decades against Yugoslav soil, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and the Serbian Sandžak. That skillful and planned aggressive Islamization causes tension among different religions, as well as conflicts in ethnically mixed communities, while causing the suppression of Christian culture in that part of Europe and the ethnocentric concentrations in Yugoslavia. In such a situation, unavoidably, the basic human rights are violated and restricted. It is of utmost necessity to overcome ideological prejudices, to stop goading the Serbian people by accusing Serbia of Bolshevism and totalitarianism, and it also means giving up current communication and information stereotypes concerning the Yugoslav situations and misfortunes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
These two are both very important, Mr. Chairman, because they're both active in the Democrat Party, which is engaged in opposing the present regime and will have candidates in the future free elections in Yugoslavia. Mr. Stojanovic, Dr. Stojanovic is a Fulbright scholar. He's a professor of international law, faculty of law at the University of Belgrade. He's the author of several books and many articles published in Yugoslavia and abroad. He taught international relations at many universities, including Harvard, Yale, and Mellon. He's a member of the Executive Committee of the Democratic Party in Belgrade. Mr. Vučković is an attorney at law who studied in France and at Florida University in Tallahassee. He's a member of the presidency of the Serbian Bar Association, a former deputy member of the Municipal Council in Belgrade. He's now an independent member of the Serbian National Assembly in Belgrade, a member of the Legislative Committee of this assembly, and executive member of the Democratic Party, which fights for human rights and democracy in Yugoslavia. Dr. Stojanovic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stojanovic and Mr. Vučković. We are very pleased to have you. Any prepared statement we will enter in the record in its entirety, and you may proceed in your own way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Bentley.
Could you pull the mic closer to you,
okay,
please?
Thank you. I am not aware. Okay, good. Okay. In this respected House of Democracy and Freedom, we are discussing human rights in Yugoslavia and more particularly in Kosovo province. Why in Kosovo provinces more particularly? Why Albanians are more persecuted than others in Yugoslavia? I am going to answer the question, and please listen to me. During the visit of the Helsinki Commission to Kosovo was the state of emergency, now terminated. I am not going to talk about the past, about the conflicts with Albanians since their conversion to Islam during the 18th century, which confronted them to Serbs who themselves remained Christians in the Ottoman Empire. Instead, I will speak about the present conflict, which took place in 1981 with the rebellion of Albanians in Kosovo. The Albanians, namely, wanted to secession from Serbia as a state. The Albanian nationalistic movement did not voice openly its intention to breaking away also from Yugoslavia. We may even suppose that they in fact did not want it. However, there is no doubt that they did want to secede from the Republic of Serbia through the creation of a separate Republic of Kosovo. Serbia is a state, and Kosovo is the part of the state. Kosovo has been and still is within Serbia since 1912, and this was recognized by international documents, international treaties. On the other hand, Yugoslavia has been transformed by Constitution of 1974 into a real confederation where member states have acquired sovereign rights in the decision-making process at the federal level, since each one of them is entitled to a veto in enacting most significant laws and international treaties. In such a way, the Federal Constitution of 1974 has deprived Serbia of its sovereign rights, since both provinces, Kosovo and Vojvodina, were able to veto all bills and international treaties concluded by Serbia. In such a way, that constitution has segmented Yugoslavia, and especially Serbia. It is entirely clear to everyone that such a Yugoslavia is on its way to total disintegration into God knows how many independent states. Both, according to the Constitution of Serbia of 1974 and to the Federal Constitution, Vojvodina and Kosovo have become entirely independent from Serbia in the spheres of legislative, executive, and judicial powers. The amendments to the Constitution of Serbia, effected in 1989, coincided with the introduction to the state of emergency, which was forced by the mass rebellion of Albanians in Kosovo. But these amendments in no way have restricted the autonomy of Kosovo, their primary goal being the restitution of the minimum of jurisdiction of Serbia, otherwise recognized anywhere in the world as a state. An autonomous province located in a state cannot have the same jurisdiction as a such state, since this would mean a realm within the realm. But this, unfortunately, has precisely been the case with Serbia in the 1974-1989 period. The revolt of Albanians, terror and violence which followed such revolt have been justified in world press by the allegation that the Albanians were fighting to preserve the autonomy taken away from them by Serbia. However, the autonomous province of Kosovo continues to have the following rights. First, it is entitled to enact independently its constitution, while Serbia has no power of vetoing it. Second, functioning of a complete state apparatus of power just as in all other republics of Yugoslavia. Third, independence of legislative power. The acts of the province cannot, however, to contrary to the constitutions of Yugoslavia and Serbia. Fourth, executive branch of province is only one competent for the implementation of provincial, republican, and federal legislative acts. Fifth, the province has also its financial autonomy, including its national bank. Sixth, Kosovo has the judicial autonomy. The Supreme Court of Kosovo is the supreme judicial body. Seventh, full language autonomy coupled with equality between all languages spoken in Kosovo. Eighth, according to the federal constitution, Kosovo is entitled to veto the most significant international treaties. Thus, should Serbia want to conclude an international treaty, Kosovo may, at the federal level, prevent such conclusion by using its veto power. 9. Also, according to the federal constitution, Kosovo may block, by using veto power, the enactment of most important laws in the federal parliament. 10th, according to the federal constitution, the authorities on Kosovo are the only ones competent for the implementation of the federal laws and the laws enacted in the Serbian parliament. 11th, finally, the parliament of Kosovo may, through its veto, prevent the amending of the constitution of Yugoslavia or the enactment of a new constitution. In fact, this is exactly what happened a few days ago. The Yugoslav federal government has proposed several amendments vital for the realization of the current economic reforms in Yugoslavia, but the Kosovo parliament has failed to adopt these documents, so as a result, the federal constitution cannot be amended. Obviously, only one conclusion may follow. The autonomous province of Kosovo has today much more power than any other federal state or unit in the world. I permit myself a comparison. How would the American Congress and Senate react should, for instance, North Carolina be entitled to veto the conclusion of a treaty between the United States and the USSR on trade and commerce? One may ask whether the requests of the Albanian nationalistic movement in Kosovo concerning the preservation of autonomy are genuine. There is no doubt whatsoever that Kosovo enjoys today a much larger, higher degree of autonomy than is known in contemporary theory and practice. What they really want is the secession from Serbia. And here another comparison is due. Would the American state of California or Florida or any other state permit the secession of a part of their territory where an ethnic group, Hispanos for instance, should become a majority population through immigration or enormous birth rate? Serbia, on the other hand, has to be transformed. We think that And I am supporter of this policy. Serbia has to be support to a democratic country, to a democratic state and parliamentary state, where all citizens should enjoy all human, civil and political rights. I do think that national question is predominantly the question on democracy, and therefore it is necessary to initiate the talks with democratically elected representatives of the Albanian people in Kosovo, finding thus a way to live together in a democratic state. But all participants of such talks have to be aware that the basis for discussion is clear. There can be no discussions or negotiations on territorial and state integrity of Serbia. Once this platform is accepted by the Albanian representatives, all other conflicts will be gradually resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Vučković.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will speak about Serbian victims as well as about... hello? I speak about Serbian victims and on the possibility of the democratic solution in Kosovo. My paper has 4 pages. I think you will let me pronounce. The modern ethnic Albanian separatist movement in Yugoslavia and in Kosovo is based on 3 main facts. First, the intention of the hardline communist regime in People's Republic of Albania to annex a part of the Yugoslav territory within ethnic Albanian population. Second, the intention of the international Islamic fundamentalism to make in Kosovo its basis for further expansion in Europe. And third, a continuation of the policy of the former Communist International Organization, Comintern, to destroy Yugoslavia, which exists still in the hardline communist ideology. As a result, a considerable number of secret ethnic Albanian separatist groups with a relatively large number of members have been formed. Since 1980, for example, 103 such groups have been discovered, with a total number of 1,710 members, out of which 948 were condemned for criminal acts by ethnic Albanian judges. Having in view the level of the violence and the number of unpunished criminal acts, it can be estimated that the number of such groups and members is several times larger. All these groups seem to be tightly connected and led from a single center. Due to the financial support from the international Albanian organizations, from the fundamentalist regimes, and from illegal distribution of narcotics, their financial power is considerable. As a result, they are very well armed, and by pressure, threatening, and blackmail, they manage to force much larger number of ethnic Albanians to join them. Actions of ethnic Albanian separatists: robberies, aggravated assaults and batteries, spreading of national hatred and crimes against human rights. In last 8 years, total 469. Arsons, 1,364, out of which 46 arsons of Serbian Orthodox Christian churches and monasteries, only in the period of 4 years. Sabotage, 488, including power stations, power and telephone lines, factories, transportation facilities, etc. period 81-89. Blocking railway lines, 145 cases, period 81-89. Sabotage against Yugoslav army, 77 cuts of telephone and telegraph lines, last 8 years. Sacrileges of Serbian Orthodox churches and graves, 307 for 82 until 87. Crimes against police forces, 14 policemen killed and 798 wounded, 68-89. Arms seized from ethnic Albanian separatists. In the last 20 years, 16,700 firearms and hand grenades. Recent terrorist actions. January 26th of this year, Mr. Chairman, February 2nd of this year, in only 7 days, in 55 villages and towns in Kosovo, were attacked the police forces by firearms and grenades. The result of organized demonstrations in the mentioned period was 3 wounded policemen, 80 assaults and batteries on policemen, 27 dead and 87 wounded and 21 injured demonstrators and separatists. 78 damages of vehicles, 3 damaged trucks, 1 helicopter, 8 police cars, and a large number of damages, houses, shops, private cars, etc. The question is in such circumstances, is it possible a democratic solution in Kosovo? I think yes. The main problem is to find out the roots of separatist movement. The movement has existed for a long time, but it was never so strong until last 25 years. During President Tito's time, the Yugoslav communist authorities followed without exception the slogan, the weaker the Serbian Republic, the stronger Yugoslavia. It should be pointed out that the development of multi-party system is inevitable. Different political views have to be presented according to the interests of every class or group. It is very likely that a system of this kind is the only one which can mitigate the nationalism and lead the country and society into a prosperous future. In such a free society, all forms of negotiations can take place. There is only one issue which cannot be discussed and which has to be clear to everybody. Kosovo has always been an integral part of the Serbian state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I call on my 2 colleagues for whatever closing comments they would like to make, let me thank all of the witnesses during the course of this 5-hour hearing. A great many things were said. We will need to ponder and think through and digest an enormous amount of material, a great deal of emotion. Before the chair offers his concluding remarks, I'd like to call on Congressman DioGuardi.
Well, I would like to conclude before I just introduce some people who came a long way, and I've gotten notes from other people who we could not hear as much as we would like. As you can see, the patience of the chair. I spent four years in Congress, and I can tell you that I don't remember any hearing where the chair was so patient to go over as he's been, and I really appreciate that, Congressman Lantos. But I should end with a reference, Congressman Lantos, to an article that I just quickly alluded to in my testimony, and this article is dated Wednesday, April 18th, 1990, It's entitled Perspectives on Eastern Europe, Ethnic Troubles, Top Agenda for New Eastern European Regimes. It's not by a Serb and it's not by an Albanian. It's by a respected columnist from Vienna, Eric Born. And just let me read just the last part of it, and I'd like to submit the whole thing for the record, Mr. Chairman. It says, the Yugoslav Party was not directly involved in the general communist collapse, but it has felt a strong backlash from the return to democracy, above all over Kosovo. The province has as many Albanians as Transylvania has Hungarians. Since the Tito era closed in 1981, it has constantly hovered on the brink of and often slipped over into civil war. Parallels go beyond numbers. Transylvania's Hungarians look for their lost rights, not reunion with Hungary. Similarly, and this is not Joe DioGuardi speaking, similarly, few Kosovars look toward Albania. However much a greater Serbia-minded Serbian leadership in Belgrade argues to the contrary. What Albanians riot for is the return of the autonomy of the 1970s and their future status of a republic within the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Czechs, Poles, Slovaks, and Hungarians all seem concerned to resolve their problems. But with Kosovo, Yugoslavia is the odd man out. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has a bigger problem in Lithuania, but he has at least hints at possible compromise in a looser Confederate Union. In Kosovo, there has been no talk even of dialogue. Helsinki Watch called Serbian and Yugoslav federal policy there, quote, a frightening example of one-party dictatorship, close quote. It is ironic that the country that broke first with the Soviet system and established equality among its nationalities for 40 years should now have Eastern Europe's gravest ethnic problem. This just appeared last week, and I want to submit the entire article for the record, Mr. Chairman. Now, before I close, let me say that we could not hear from Mr. Leka Lujurai, and by the way, he's here. He traveled from Montenegro. He's a representative of the Albanians in the Montenegrin parliament, and the only comment I have here that I should say is that he is paid $25 a month, but his colleagues, who are Montenegrins, get a few $100s a month. This is the kind of discrimination against Albanians, even outside of Kosovo today in the country of Yugoslavia. But let me then end by referring to others today who came a long way, who thought they would testify. But, Mr. Chairman, please accept their statements for the record, and let me at least mention who they are. You've got Dr. Shkelzen Milici. He's the president of the League of Philosophers and the sociologist of Kosovo, and his co-chairman is Dr. Isov Berisha, and he's here as well. We have Halil Matoshi, who was let out of jail just in time to get on the plane to come here. We thought Dr. Sana would join him, but they did not see fit to do that with him. But he is the president of the Youth Parliament, Halil Matoshi. We've got we've heard from Lulieta Pulabiciri. We've got the president of the Democratic Association of Farmers in Kosovo here, Dr. Hivzi Islami. We've got the president of the Independent Trade Union of Kosovo, that's Hai Gorani. We also have a retired general from the Yugoslav army, ethnic Albanian, who now is running in the elections in Croatia, Tom Berisha, who I had the pleasure of meeting in Slovenia. And we have Professor Gazman Zaimi. And also, and I shouldn't say last but not least, we've got two others, a partner in the Democratic Alliance of Kosovo, Yusuf Puchovi, and Dr. Idris Ayeti, who is the president of the Council for the Defense of Human Rights and Freedoms in Kosovo, kind of a co-chairman with Dr. Tsana, and he allowed Professor Pula to make the statement for him. I hope I didn't miss any others. I just want to mention three others that came from far away, believe it or not. We have people who landed this morning from New Zealand, an ethnic Albanian, Mazda Krasnici, and one who landed from Australia, where there are 30,000 Albanians in Melbourne alone, Max Safari, and also Emir Bardi from Dallas. So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted you to know the price of freedom does not come easily. These people came all the way to see this in action, to see democracy in action, so that one day, and don't forget, when Ibrahim Rugova first thought about the Democratic Alliance, he went to Ambassador Zimmerman and requested the Constitution of the United States of America as a model. I believe these people are here today because they want this room and this hearing to be a model for the whole world, especially in Kosovo.
Well, on behalf of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, I want to thank all the witnesses and all of you here in this hall. We have been here for 5 hours. And when the emotions subside, and as we move towards the resolution of these very deep-seated problems, and we will move towards a resolution peacefully and democratically and diplomatically, the memory of this 5-hour hearing, with all its pain and all its anguish, will go down as a historic episode as the people of the great country of Yugoslavia learn to live together in peace and harmony. This hearing is adjourned.